Good evening, students. Welcome to non-democratic regimes. Last class we talked about democratic regimes. This class is about non-democratic regimes. If you have studied that class, there are a lot of similarities that points to remember similarities you will have, so it'll be easier and it's a quick lecture. Let's do it. Okay. I want to first start with this novels, first two lines. Novel? Yes. Anna Karenina. I have problems pronouncing that. It's a Russian novel in English. Leo Tolstoy wrote, "All happy families are alike, and unhappy families are unhappy in their own ways." This is how he started the novel. Okay. And why am I quoting that here? I would like to use that here because democratic regimes are very similar in happy in the same way, but non-democratic regimes are non-democratic not because of the similarities; they have variations in them. Okay, like for example, oligarchy. It's a non-democratic regime. Oligarchy means rule by a few. Okay, a group of people, a mob rules. Oligarchy. Dictatorship, you heard of it. Dictator, that is a person dictating to the public. Okay, telling them what to do. It's a dictator. And so these, and we're going to see many other different types. I'm just giving you a couple of examples. So non-democratic regimes are missing some vital elements democratic regimes have. What are they? So they don't allow participation. They don't allow participation in what? In the election of their leaders. Yeah. No competition. No competition means if there is an election, if there is, okay, some countries, like say Russia, it's a non-democratic state, show of election, but not letting competition. Another one is Zimbabwe, Mugabe. He was a leader for almost 50 years, half a century, can you believe? And a dictator. And he will beat up the opposition candidate. His men will go and beat up. So there's no competition, not allowing competition. Okay, that's the second. And the third point non-democratic regimes have is, or don't have, is liberty. So the liberty, the competition, the participation, all those things are present in a democratic regime, but not in a non-democratic regime. So what do you mean liberty? Liberty is freedom. Freedom for what? For the people of the country. And examples like freedom of speech, freedom of practicing your religion, all those things enshrined in the American Constitution, in the Bill of Rights, they don't have it. I mean, they won't have a constitution. It's non-democratic, right? So non-democratic states, if you look at it, what are the things? Write it down as people who are few in power. They have control of power. People don't have control of power. Second point, people don't have control of power through a constitutional means. No, there's no constitution. Okay? And even if it is, it will be changed by the dictator, authoritarian, in the way he wants. Okay? And he will completely rule. Okay. And what else is missing there? I already told you about it's missing civil liberties, it's missing competition, it's missing participation of the people. So all these points are important to know what's a non-democratic regime. Okay. Now, before we go to see towards the end of the lecture, we'll see models of a non-democratic regime. I want to talk about a unique non-democratic regime. This is unique from the other ones. It's called totalitarian. Oh, sounds very full mouth. Write it down, total, T-O-T-A-L. You know how to write total. And after L, L-A, there's no L-A, T-O-T-A-L, L, after the L-A, T-A-T-I-R-I-A-N, totalitarian, T-A-R-I-A-N. Okay, I got confused now. Totalitarian regimes, what do they have? You know, sometimes when you write on the board, it flows, but when you say it, it's hard. I should have written on the board. Totalitarian regimes have something unique compared to other non-democratic regimes. They are having an ideology. Yeah, I was giving the gap so that maybe some of you might think, oh, I know actually what's the difference. Because Hannah Arendt, one of the greatest philosophers of 20th century, wrote a book on totalitarianism. Yes, about Hitler, the Nazi Hitler, and also the Stalin. Okay, so they have an ideology. The Nazi ideology is the Nazi ideology, right? It's a Nazi party and it's an ideology. He actually took, if you want to know a little bit more, took idea of nationalism from the right, okay, here, nationalism, and socialism from the left, Nazi party, okay, nationalism, NA, socialistic party. In German, it's Nazi, in abbreviation. And then the communists have their ideology. We talked about political ideologies in 2 classes before. Go back and listen to the lecture if you want, right? So communism is an ideology. And here's an important thing. Not only just having an ideology will make an authoritarian, non-authoritarian regime into a totalitarian. It also must fuse society, economics, and the state. The 3 things, 3 components, state, society, and economy, are fused together for the benefit of the state. And how do they fuse that? They fuse that through violence. Okay? So if you want to think back to lecture on political attitudes, the totalitarian regimes usually come from far right and far left. Because far right and far left are the ones who want to do the changes, and to do the changes, they have to destroy the existing structure. Otherwise, it's harder to make the changes fast enough for them. Remember, the far left radicals want progressive, fast progress. And then the far right reactionaries wants to go back, change, not forward, backward. And so both of them are not hesitant to use force or violence. Okay? Totalitarian regimes. There's only one totalitarian regime in the current times, in the times we live. Anybody know? North Korea. North Korea is the only totalitarian regime. There are many authoritarian regimes, okay, based on the definitions we've given, but they're not like Saudi Arabia, like China, like Russia. All these are non-democratic regimes, but they're not totalitarian. Good. Now let's talk about how do these totalitarian regimes, not totalitarian, non-democratic regimes. You remember what a regime is, right? I'll remind you. Regime is like the software of the computer. Remember? Yes. Okay. Go back. It's less institutionalized than the state, but more institutionalized than the government. The government is the operator of the computer. State is the hardware. Remember that analogy, it will be good. So the regime, non-democratic regimes, how do they stay in power? It's a good question to think about. So how do they stay? They stay in power. The first one is called coercion. Coercion. This is the coercion, and you could write it down, and surveillance. Surveillance is the whole dictatorial way. Hitler used it, and Mr. Stalin, the villain, used it. If you are interested in reading one fiction book, it becomes just #1 seller again in Amazon. Read this. It's a classic. Many of you would have read in high school. 1984, George Orwell. Ooh. It makes you see the world, especially political regimes, differently. The Big Brother is watching. It all came from there, from the book. It's really powerful book, written almost 50 years ago, 50, 60 years ago, and still George Orwell's book, still a classic. It was not written in 1984, way before that, but it's called 1984. Now, why did I say that? That's Big Brother watching is always watching, surveillance everywhere. everywhere you go, they're watching you, and your neighbors are watching you. Why would neighbors care what I do? Well, the neighbors don't want you to snitch on them, so they will snitch on you before you do. False, trumped up charges. You'll be gone. There'll be a knock at the door in the middle of the night, as they say in Nazi Germany and in Stalin's Russia 1930s. Then the person will never be seen again. Be gone. Purging. Yeah, their own people. They kill their own people, these authoritarians in power. I'll give you a little more about Stalin. If you're interested in reading a book which will take you to another world, nonfiction, okay, Symphony for the Dead City. It's unbelievable. I was thrilled to just finish it. It's scary of what Stalin purged. He killed, are you ready? 8 million of his own people. Why? To create fear and to have a complete, absolute control. When he came to power after Lenin's death in communism, he killed that many people, 8 million. 90% of military officers, 90% of generals were killed. 70% of military officers were killed. That's like 20,000 of them. Shot, pam, 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 and buried. People would just sit in the home. They'd hear gunshots. They won't dare to go out. If you read that book, especially, it's about Dmitri Shostakovich, brilliant musician. He wrote symphonies. Okay, he's writing during Hitler's army is putting a siege to Leningrad, and he's in Leningrad. Starving people are, and he's writing the symphonies. It's amazing story of hardships what people went through before Germany went on a war with Hitler and Stalin. Stalin killed 8 million of his people because of purging of his own military. It was so weak when Hitler's army invaded Russia, in the Soviet Union. Isn't that interesting how? Okay. So killing, and Hitler is also known for killing. Trumped up charges, and he will be executed. There's no checks and balances. There's no court versus executive branch, legislative, nothing. Leader says you will have a list. He will just strike every night, and those people will be gone. Just for the sake of keeping fear constantly, everybody on edge. That's the old way, surveillance. Your neighbor will snitch on you. Oh yeah, I think he's bourgeoisie. He's not into communism. That's it. You will be gone. So surveillance and coercion, they use those techniques. Another one, the modern non-democratic regimes are doing a different one. And that is, anybody know? Co-optation. C-O-P-T-A-T-I-O-N. Like cooperation. You know the word cooperation? Okay. And that word blended together, co-optation. Co-optation has two categories. Okay. And write it down. Co-optation's first word is called corporatism, like corporate America. Corporatism. Corporate. Corporatism means the leader, say I'm the leader, non-democratic regime. I have approved certain agencies to be represented by the people. You had to get permission from me. So I might approve student associations, agricultural association. I might not approve of religious organizations. Remember, if you go back to thinking about civil society, how civil society is important, vital for a democratic regime, right? So this is corporatism. I approve as a non-democratic regime dictator or an authoritarian, approve certain agencies that is a conduit for people to say what they want to the government. But others I won't allow. You following me? On the other hand, clientelism, like client, meeting a client. Clientelism is different. Clientelism is still me in the non-democratic regime, I'm in power. I allow individuals who surrounding me, like could be military men, and I give them favors. Okay, so for example, North Korea does this. North Korea, what it does is, um, not the current dictator Kim Jong Un, even before him, his father used to do it. He will send a man, one of his men, to go to European countries and buy costly things, from watches, Rolex watches, to name it, fancy cars. He will bring it, and based on the level and power of the individual, he will give. So by giving those things, they are accountable to the leader. It's like gift giving. It's like the mob boss, clientelism. And this way, they don't need to give everybody, the people. It is just the few powerful people who will be accountable to me. So in that way, I could keep the masses down. Isn't that interesting how they're doing it? Corporatism and clientelism. It's less expense, complete domination. It's easier in a way than complete surveillance and mass purging like Stalin did. Stalin is maniacal. He enjoyed, in fact, enjoyed people trembling in front of him and killing them, all those things, and putting them in awkward situation, all those things. Anyway, we could talk about psychopathic tendencies of these guys. It's a whole lecture we could do. But let's move on. Another one, we talked about corporatism, clientelism. The first one we talked about is coercion and surveillance. The last one, personality cults. So these are 4 ways the non-democratic regimes stay in power. What is personality cult? That's right. It's based on an individual's charisma. Remember the charismatic legitimacy? They stay in power. A good example is Iran, when it became in 1979 an Islamic republic. Yeah, it's not really a republic. There's no competition. The top leader, the religious leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, will select, handpick who will run for president. Even now, after his death, the next guy who took over power, Ayatollah Khamenei, who took over power, will handpick the guys who want to run for president, and 3 people or 4 people, and they run, and its elections are rigged anyway. So, religious personality cult. You go there, Ayatollah Khomenei's photos were everywhere. Similarly, in Venezuela, Hugo Chavez is a personality cult. Through that, they keep their power. Images everywhere of them. You could even say, in a way, North Korea is like, but did you use that for example for the previous one? Not any regime is just one single way. They could use other elements. We are talking about different methods. They could use different methods to stay in power. Now, North Korea, the video you will be watching will be showing how huge, like Statue of Liberty size statue of the father and the grandfather who started North Korea. And people can't even show their back when they're walking back after seeing the statue. You can't turn around and show your back. You got to just go like this. That kind of complete domination of people. People have pins. I'm wearing American flag. Every North Korean will be wearing a photo, 2 photos of the grandfather and the father, the 2 other dictators who were in power. You following? Okay. Now let's talk about, before we go to different types of non-democratic regimes or models of non-democratic regimes, I want to touch on something I said similar to last lecture, which is, why do you think, how do you think non-democratic regimes are formed? Remember the 5 points, how democratic regimes are formed? Yes? Okay. The same way. Like, for example, culture, international relations, it reminds you, society. Society means global civil society, right? Elites, right? And modernization. All these 5 points. Now let's talk about modernization in non-democratic regime. So countries which have less than 20,000 GDP per capita. You know what GDP per capita, we talked about it in another lecture. So those countries, poor countries, tend to be more non-democratic. Okay? So basically, bourgeoisie, people with money, want access to power. When a country gets wealthy, then it tends to become democratic. Then you might ask, oh, wait a minute, China, it's not there yet at that amount, but they're believing when it crosses this $20,000, it could become a democratic. Well, we'll wait and see. This is based on correlation, not causation exactly, based on, you know the difference? Looking at around the world of countries which are non-democratic and the GDP per capita of them. So modernization. Now write down the second point, elites and non-democratic regimes. These are elites, means few people staying in power. Are they staying in power? So in a democratic society, I am a voter. I pay taxes. So I pay taxes. The government take the taxes. In return, they give me security and all these things. Right? They can't violate my civil liberties. We have constitution. People, we the people, as the American Constitution says, we are the powerful. We people are, not the government, not the presidency. We the people are the powerful. We form this union. Okay? So consent of the governed. Whereas in the non-democratic regime, the elites don't need the consent of me or you. So how do they? They don't collect taxes. So how do they? Where do they get money? In order to run a government, you need money. They use natural resources. Countries with natural resources, oil, like Saudi Arabia. Okay. Hugo Chavez, when he was in Venezuela power, oil. And Mr. Putin, the villain, is also staying in power because of oil money and other natural resources. So when a country has, say, let's talk about Saudi Arabia, the oil money they take, they do distribute it, but very little to the people. Most of it to the people who are surrounding them. Again, remember clientelism? Yeah. So they don't need to be accountable. They will get, you don't need to pay taxes if you're a person there and you're like, yeah, cool. Yeah, but you're living in fear. Yeah, watch the documentary and the life difference you will understand. So elites stay in power because they have access to natural resources like diamond, oil, wood, you name it. Many of the sub-Saharan African countries who are non-democratic are staying in power because of their access to natural resources. Okay. Now this, we finished 2 points. Third one, let's talk about international relations. United States have went and overthrown a freely elected democratic prime minister of Iran in the 1950s, early 1950s. His name was Mossadegh. Why would they overthrow him? Because he was about to nationalize the oil fields. That means he said the oil fields in Iran belongs to Iran. You're like, yeah, obviously. But BP and other oil companies were taking oil out of it. So if they nationalize it, it's the profits will not go to those companies but to Iran. So CIA operated a coup to overthrow, and it became non-democratic. You're thinking, wow, yeah, we have done many regime changes to non-democratic. Yeah, we've done good and also bad. Similarly, now China is intervening in all the sub-Saharan African countries and giving money to these dictators. Why would they care? Why do they give? Because in return, the access to natural resources, cement, iron, you name it, all these minerals. China is growing fast. They need to build things. And so they get all these minerals from African countries. Are you following? So that's how international relations, other countries, powerful countries, come in and support non-democratic regimes or create non-democratic regimes. Yeah. America has overthrown in Chile a freely elected leader, Allende, when Nixon was president, 1970s. Anyway, what's another next point? We talked about elites, we talked about modernization, we talked about international relations, and okay, civil society. Civil society, as you know, is anything functioning outside the realm of state power. So, Boy Scout, religious organization, or environmental groups, all these things, right? In non democratic regimes, they won't allow that to happen. You go to North Korea, you're not going to have Boy Scout or Girl Scout or things outside. Everything, even if there's people, boys or girls gathering and marching and working, they have to praise the leader. From childhood onwards, the propaganda always teaches them to worship the leader. They make them mythological powers. So to see in another way is impossible if you're brainwashed from childhood. So there's no independent civil societies. The last one is, as I said, for democratic regime, it's the same thing. Culture. Culture has an impact in creating non-democratic regimes. See, some scholars say in Christianity, especially Protestant work ethic and individualism is taught. So it's not part of a group mentality. West is more individualistic society than the East. Okay, you go to Asian cultures, it's obedience to authority is very high, and so it is easier to create a non-democratic regime. And you might say, well, what about South Korea? They're democratic. Yeah, that was because of the U.S. What about Japan? You would say, oh, that also is America, after World War II created it, just like South Korea. Are you following? So many of the Asian countries were non-democratic because of the culture. And you might say, what about India? India was ruled by the British, and its leaders, founding fathers, it's a unique situation. It had their education from the West, and so they created a democratic society. Israel, even Ben Gurion had a Western idea, and he loved reading about American founding fathers. So he became one of the founding fathers of Israel. Democratic Israel is a democracy in a sea of non-democratic regimes in the Middle East. Are you following me? So the five. Now let's talk about, this is important what I'm going to talk about now. Models of non-democratic regime. There's going to be 5 freaking different models. What are those 5 freaking different models? The first one, okay, is a military rule. Write it down. A military rule. What is a military rule? A model for non-democratic regime. I'll give you an example. Burmese junta. Junta is spelled Junta. Junta. The military junta ruled Burma. For those who don't know where Burma, Myanmar or Burma is, very close to India. Okay, Rangoon. They ruled almost for 50 years, military power. Pakistan, which became separate from India, right, in 1947 and become a country, was many times ruled by military. It has democracy, but the democratically elected leader will be overthrown. So military power will have the military highest army chief will take over. Like even in 21st century in Pakistan, Pervez Musharraf, he took over power. Okay? Because by coup d'etat. You know what a coup d'etat is? Coup d'etat, C-O-U-P, okay, space, D, put a dash, it's a French word, dash at the top, E-T-A-T, E-T-A-T, D dash E-T-A-T. Coup d'etat means a coup of small number of people overthrowing the government and taking over power. So the military leaders overthrow was about to happen in the United States. These people went into Congress, right? They called them a coup to overthrow freely elected leaders. Are you following? What's the difference between that and a revolution then? Revolution is a mass, entire country rises like a wave to overthrow the government. It has more legitimacy. Coup d'etat is just few people overthrowing. Most people hated what happened in American Congress. In fact, some people call a coup d'etat into a revolution so that their new regime will have legitimacy. A good example is Lenin, when he overthrew the czars in the 1917 and created communism, first time communistic government in the world. He called it a revolution, October Revolution. It was not a revolution. Technically, it's a coup d'etat. He and his henchmen overthrew the czar government. Are you following? Yeah. So military rule, how do they stay in power for that model? They stay in power because of using military force. So military is under control. So if I am the military army chief, that means I'm like the top. United States have joint chief of staff. So this guy is usually a guy. Yeah. Never a girl. Listen to mind, yeah. And this guy will overthrow the freely elected government. Say it's me. I keep these people of my country under control by military. If you go against me, then you know the consequences. That's how they stay in power. What about another example, another model? Monarchical. Basically monarchy. Okay? Monarchy. A monarchy is what? A king or a queen. Like queen in England. Or in Saudi Arabia, the king. Do you follow me? So the kings, they have a legitimacy, traditional legitimacy, you know that, right? And they rule. And they rule through not coercion, but because they have legitimacy traditionally or hereditarily, nobody revolts against them. And they stay in power. Of course, the British monarchy doesn't have absolute power like the Saudi Arabia king family, because parliament has power. The power eroded over time, over hundreds of years in the British land. Okay? If you go 1,000 years ago, the king absolute power changed little by little. The aristocrats first took power, or not took power. The king cannot arbitrarily remove them or punish them. That's the Magna Carta. It's a deal between the king, basically, and the aristocrats, not with the common people, just these wealthy aristocrats. Hey, you can't just do anything to us. Okay, that's the deal. Anything you want, anything bad. Are you following? Okay. Now, a third one is theocracy. Oh, before I go to the theocracy, I want to talk about in monarchical or individualistic. Some people just individually stay in power. How do they stay in power? I will give you a good example. Congo's leader, his name is Mobutu, Seko, and you're like, whoa. I am going to spell it. Mobutu, 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 CC, space, SESE, Seko, SEKHO. Mobutu CC Seko. He was the leader of Congo. You're like, where's Congo? Oh, look it up. A large country in the middle of Africa. And when you're in free time, if you're just lying bored out of your mind, use your GPS, just go around the world, look at places. And then if you go far into Russia, most of the places are mentioned in English. So you could learn about geography. It opens your mind, learning and knowledge. And that gives you power to see things differently. Okay? So Mobutu Sese Seko stayed in power through how? Patrimonialism. I will spell it patrimony. They call it patrimonialism. 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 So it's like the clientelism. Patrimonialism. So Mobutu Sese Seko, what he did, he got money from natural resources and also from foreign aid. And so he will give some to the people around him, his people, some surrounding him, not the majority of the people. They were starving. He lived in palaces, multiple wives. They will go in their private Concorde jet at the time, the nose tipped mechanical. Anyway, if you don't know Concorde, that's fine. It's faster than the normal jets we have. Rent it, go to shopping in England and London and other places, France, Paris. Pink champagne is what they drink. Unbelievable amount of waste of money. He siphoned about $4 billion, poor country, $4 billion to Swiss banks, his personal accounts. Finally, he was kicked out of power. So they stay in power for long using this patrimonialism. So monarchy are individualistic. Rather than individualistic, personal, you could put personal and monarchical. So now I talked about military rule, and I talked about, did I talk about theocracy? No. Okay, write it down. Theocracy. Theo, Theo, means religion. Religion, rule by religious decree. So they are saying they got the mandate from heaven to rule. A good example is the Iran now. Okay, they are clerics. There are clerics. Clerics means like the clerk in the office. No, the religious clerics, CLERICS. These religious clerics give who? Give the religious leader in power the legitimacy. So politics and religion is combined, and so nobody can oppose it. And this leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, the next guy, all stay in power until their death or somebody overthrows them. That because they have the religious mandate from heaven, not from the people who vote and give mandate, to Biden, give the mandate to govern. This is from heaven, religion. So they govern using religion, because religion says so. Iran is Shia, Shia. It's a sect of Islam. If you go to Saudi Arabia, it's Sunni, Sunni. Most of the world's Islam is Sunni. Muslims, 85%. Shia is the single largest minority. There's other Muslim minorities. We don't want to talk about that now. So, theocracy, rule, religious rule. Now write it down. One party rule. One party rule. By the way, I hope you're writing down the examples I give for all this, right? I gave you example for monarchical rule and also for personal. I gave you example for military. I gave you example for theocracy. Now, one party rule. Good example is China. Just one party, Communist Party in power. And how do they stay in power? Because everybody who wants to join a party will join theirs. Your game is the only show in town where they're going to go. And they accept. Otherwise, well, you know the consequences in a non-democratic regime if you don't accept. If you try to create trouble, the troublemaker will get killed. So not just them, the whole family. Yeah. You have to read some of the fun and books, also tragical books, like people escaping from North Korea. It'll open your eyes of a different world, which is in reality, not a fiction like Harry Potter. It's like reality, scary. Right? Camp 14, check out this. At least watch the documentary. Camp 14, North Korea, if you type, it'll come. Read this guy's story. You'll be amazed how he's born in a camp, concentration camp. Anyway, I don't want to give you so much. The last one, illiberal regimes. You know liberal, Liberal. Illiberal is put IL in front. Illiberal regimes. This was a word coined by Fareed Zakaria, if you know him, CNN. Illiberal regimes or hybrid regimes. It's either word is fine. Illiberal or hybrid, like a car, hybrid regimes. Hybrid regime is or illiberal regime is, it looks like liberal, but it's not. That means it looks like a democracy, but it's not. It's a perfect example is like Russia. So current Russia, they have elections, but Putin will win. Putin will win. It's not like tough contest. No. Any democracy where they say like, oh, our leader won 90% of the vote, doubt that. Even like landslide victories in America, go and see. It's like 54%, 58%, not like 75% or 80%. The opposite party is also equally tough fight. You follow it? Yeah. Biden won by what? 7 million votes. 80 million. Other guy got, right? So it's close. It's not like 90%. So Putin in the other case, it's like rigged. The election is completely rigged. Nobody get to compete and win this giant leviathan. So illiberal regimes, they stay in power, showing the legitimacy like it's a democratic regime, but it's not. Are you following? So these are the 5 different models or types of non-democratic regime. Okay, and I have a documentary for you to watch. Watch the documentary on North Korea, and you will understand what life is inside. It's amazing, millions of views. And I will see you in the next lecture.